Welcome to the Living Out podcast, helping people, churches and society talk about faith and sexuality. Hello and welcome to the latest edition of the Living Out podcast. My name's Anne, I'm your host for today, and on this podcast we like to talk about faith and sexuality. This series is all about questions that no one wants to answer, and today's question is, does Christian teaching cause LGBT mental health problems? Fortunately, I'm not on my own, I'm joined by my friends Ed, Andrew and Andy. Before we get on to this tricky question, here's an easy starter for 10. What activities do you find relaxing and mentally refreshing? I am going to start with Andrew.
I feel obliged at this point to say something like musical theatre, because I normally do, but I'm actually not going to, although obviously I enjoy that. I'm quite simple. I enjoy walking. I just enjoy out fresh air. I do quite enjoy physical activity. So yeah, walking, I run a bit. But I really love music in general as well. And playing the piano would be my main. If I need to unwind, I need to de-stress. That's what I would do.
Just heard you playing the piano and it's beautiful. So great.
Did it de-stress you?
It did de-stress me. What about you, Ed?
Well, my microphone is balanced on a box set of The West Wing, which is a good reminder of how much joy God's brought into my life through The West Wing over the years. So, I love a really good box set, and the top of the list in my life experience is The West Wing. So I will often watch it, particularly to decompress at the end of the day. Sometimes when I really need a good cry, I'll just put The West Wing on, even the theme tune going will get me blubbing nicely.
Wow. Have you ever done a back-to-back marathon?
Of The West Wing? Actually, I've done quite a few at a time, but I've done the back-to-back of The Lord of the Rings, where you watch the extended version, all three in a day.
I'd find that so stressful.
No, it was brilliant. It was really good fun.
What about you, Andy?
Slightly worryingly, I'm with these two guys, so I love The West Wing as well. I'm now at the stage where there's not a lot of point watching it because I know the line before it's actually said. But like Andrew, I love coastal walks as well. So having sort of often talked about the fact that our interests don't really coincide, strangely they are today.
Well, I've never seen The West Wing, so Ed, don't do that face. So maybe I'll get into that one day. For me, it's more playing my ukulele, which is relaxing for me and not for anyone else.
Yeah, the sort of shared interest has just gone out the window, hasn't it?
But I also enjoy getting out in nature, doing photography, watching animals, playing pool with friends, all that kind of stuff. So plenty of things to mentally refresh and unwind. So the question we're looking at today is, does Christian teaching cause LGBT mental health problems? I thought it'd be helpful to start with by sort of zooming out a little bit and thinking more generally about mental health and the LGBT community. So why are LGBT people more likely to experience mental health problems?
Well, I think one of the things that should sadden everybody who loves other people, which I hope is everybody listening to this podcast, is that mental health rates amongst LGBT people, sexual minority groups, is the rates just much higher, and that can concern us. Should concern us, and lead us to really think about this issue and pray into it as Christians. Something that really got me thinking about it was Matthew Todd's book Straight Jacket. Matthew Todd was editor of Attitude magazine, which is UK's sort of leading gay magazine. That's what they call themselves. And one of the concerns he brings up in his book is that there's a LGBT mental health crisis, and that we really need to be asking ourselves as a society profound questions as to why those from sexual minority groups struggle particularly with their mental health. What's behind that? What's gone wrong? How can we do better at loving and caring for a sexual minority? So this is a question for society as a whole, as well as us as followers of Jesus.
One of the common answers given to the question, why are there these elevated experiences of mental health problems among LGBT people, is what's called the social stress model, which is the idea that being LGBT in our cultural context brings a load of stress through kind of shame, discrimination, a sense of stigma against LGBT people, and that actually those things contribute then to mental ill health. And there is research that I think suggests that. I mean, that's kind of the case made in Matthew Todd's book and makes it quite well also within academic research, there's plenty of research that shows those things do have an effect. Sometimes that stuff's hard to measure. It's always worth thinking, actually, what are the methodologies, how are these studies done, all that kind of thing, looking into them a bit, recognizing some of the weaknesses. And something just hard to study. Stigma is really hard to study. How do you measure whether that is the case? But generally speaking, it's agreed that is part of the factor, social stress in a way. But also, I'm struck, having done some research into it, there are professors and such like who are much cleverer than I am, looked into lots of it, say it doesn't seem to be the whole solution to the answer. And particularly, it's interesting, you look at places like the Netherlands and I think it's Sweden, both of them, they did 2 10-year studies, and both some of the most progressive, as it were, nations in the world, as in most accepting of same-sex relationships, all that kind of thing. And in one country, LGBT mental health improved over 10 years. In one country, it didn't. And so it's not necessarily the case that just because the culture becomes more accepting and therefore the social stress should go down, mental health among LGBT people necessarily improves. So it seems to be a factor, but it isn't the whole picture. And it's part of a picture maybe, rather than the overall solution.
Mm. Do you think sort of attitudes of families makes a difference as well?
Definitely, yeah. Again, the research will show that's a huge thing. And actually, the attitudes and responses of family members and those closest to an individual are far more important than people less close or people they don't know and kind of general societal views. So definitely. So family rejection is one of the strongest predictors of mental ill health among LGBT people. But I think it's so important to think, what does that actually mean? And actually, when you look into it, it's quite extreme things like being excluded from a family, like being told you're going to bring shame on a family, kind of really very actively rejecting things. It's not what some people say. I know we're jumping the gun a bit here, actually, of having a disagreement with a family member over what is right or wrong in terms of same-sex relationships. And so actually the research shows, saying you can't be part of this family or you can't come to this family event because you say you're gay can have a very serious effect. But actually saying we don't believe same-sex relationships are God's best for people, there's not the evidence to show that within families causes the problems.
So it's generally quite extreme treatment and rejection that causes the biggest issues. Yeah.
Matthew Todd, if I remember him rightly, is quite interesting because one of the things he's sort of trying to work out is, as there's more and more acceptance in society of same-sex sexual relationships and partnerships, he's saying, well, actually, mental health should be improving. Why isn't that the case? And that's really interesting and really troubling. And I think it's probably got something to do with the fact that difference is really hard. When you're growing up, coping with being different is hard, and it does have an effect in any area of life. But in the end, however much society in some ways changes in its attitudes towards sexual minority groups, we'll always still be minority groups because we are. And that is always going to bring pressure. It's always going to bring feelings of isolation. It's always going to bring an element of, I'm not the same as the majority of people. And we just got to factor that into the, to the past, present, and the future. Minority groups will still be minority groups, and that will still bring a level of dissonance within people like us from the rest of the culture, because we're not the same as the majority of our peers growing up. And that's going to have an effect, understandably, on a whole host of things, including mental health.
And the difficulty is the growing up period where you sense the direction of your attractions and other people won't know whilst you do know. And that's a difficult period. The assumption will be you're straight, you're opposite sex attracted. As you grow up that you're not. That's just a really difficult period to work through when you know and nobody else does. That's tough. And that will be for people irrespective of whether they're Christians or not.
Yeah, so it's fair to say that this isn't a particularly Christian issue. This is an issue for LGBT people, whatever background, whatever environment that they've been brought up in. Let's sort of focus in now specifically on Christian things. So often an accusation that's levelled at Christians is that biblical teaching and sort of church culture is harmful to LGBT mental health. Do you think that's a fair criticism? Has biblical teaching been used in a way that is harmful to LGBT mental health?
I think sometimes careless biblical teaching has done that. So a church culture which, rightly in our view, holds to the right context for sex being between a marriage and a man and a woman, and proclaims that loudly, but never says anything else, never says, but you might be here and you're wrestling with being gay or same-sex attracted. This is the good news for you. So I think careless Bible teaching that will assert that truth, but then never say anything to people wrestling with same-sex attraction. Teenagers can, I think, wrongly get the sense that means I'm going to be condemned. The reality is they probably wouldn't, but because that's never been spelt out, it can do damage.
Mm. Yeah, I think as well, it's not just teaching that people need to hear. They actually need to see the alternative lived out well, don't they? So it's not just Bible says no to the type of sexual relationships that you want, but it's also, so what is the alternative that helps me to flourish? And that is rich church community, it's friendships, it's singleness being seen as a really good thing and actually being made plausible because of the way we do church life. And if all that's missing, then it can be a very difficult place to be for somebody who's experiencing same-sex attraction.
Yes, so basically when Christians haven't been Christian, it's been damaging. And, the other example, of course, is gay conversion therapy and some of the interventions that have been attempted on people's sort of mindset and sexuality that have been deeply damaging, have often left deep mental, spiritual, emotional scars. But that's because Christians haven't been Christian. It's not them taking Bible teaching and force. It's misapplying the Bible in really cruel and harmful ways, and really important for us to recognise that that's happened, but also point out the distinction.
Mm. Yeah, so it seems the main damage to LGBT Christians' mental health is by Christians and churches not acting in a Christ-like way. So being homophobic or being careless in speech and actions, or by making the false claim that same-sex attracted Christians need to become straight in order to follow Jesus properly, or by experiencing rejection from parents or leaders and that kind of thing. Those things can all be damaging to LGBT mental health, but they are not a Christ-like way to live. So let's turn now to the question of whether the biblical pattern for sexuality itself is harmful for same-sex attracted people. Is the Bible's teaching on sexual morality that is between a man and a woman in the context of a marriage, is that intrinsically harmful for LGBT people?
The best thing about biblical teaching is it's sexually liberating for everybody. And one of the most sexually liberating things about what the Bible teaches is that we don't have to have sex and we don't have to be sexually active to enjoy life as human beings. And I think one of the things that's causing most damage to people's health in a whole host of ways, including their mental health in our society today, is the insistence that we increasingly have that you have to be sexually active, you have to be enjoying sex to be a human being. The Bible says that, sex is a great gift from God in creation, but it never insists that everybody has to be sexually active. In fact, the perfect human being is, of course, Jesus, who was a sexual being who never had sex, and who seems to, when you read the Gospels and you look at his life, you think this is a sexually liberated man. If I want to know what sexual liberation looks like, I need to look at him and see the sexual liberation that he lives out on this planet, but he also invites us all to enjoy in following him.
Yeah, one of the things that gives me the greatest hope really is that it's only the Christian message, it's only the gospel, it's only relationship with Jesus that meets our deepest needs. Any other kind of human relationship is going to fall short. And we all want unconditional love. We all want to be known. We want to be loved even though we are known, even though somebody knows the sort of deepest, darkest things about us. And it's only through knowing God, knowing Jesus that can happen.
But it's worth acknowledging that there is some cost involved in it. So not to be married, not to have a sexual relationship, at one level that is missing out on something the Bible says is good. So we do need to be realistic. There is some cost involved in it. And yet, what you always find in the Bible, and I think we prove in our lives, is that cost ends up being worth it. That as you make sacrifices, it ends up pressing you deeper into Jesus, who made the ultimate sacrifice. You find all kinds of other avenues of satisfaction and so on. So we do want to be realistic. There is a cost involved in it, but I think we would testify to the fact that that cost is ultimately worth it.
I guess one of the ways that people would see biblical sexuality or Bible's teaching of sexuality as potentially harmful to LGBT people is the fact that people assume it will leave us lonely. As to those who choose to be single out of commitment to Christ, the assumption is that's a kind of a being condemned to this awful, lonely situation. But actually, I think that's a misunderstanding of biblical teaching, because that's actually what we talked about earlier. It's an imbalanced picture of biblical teaching, missing out all this stuff on the importance of friendship and the incredibly high view of friendship that the Bible has compared to our culture, of the reality of church as family. That's our identity of who we are, and then it needs to be how we live. So actually, all of us do get to experience life-giving, intimate relationship, get to experience family and family life within church context, within friendship, whether single or married. And so actually the assumption is it's harmful, so it denies us something, when actually the breadth of biblical teaching means all of us get those life-giving relationships we need.
And so again, it's, back to, I suppose, something we were saying in answer to the previous question is Bible teaching, when the Bible's taught well and lived well, is fine. There are times when the Bible has not been taught well and not lived out, and that's damaging. But, do it properly, do it well, which is what we're trying to do through living out, and you'll find that it is life to the full. It's the life to the full that Jesus both, as it were, models and offers anybody that follows him.
We've actually got some great resources on our website if you want to look in more depth at these issues that we've talked about so far. So particularly the LGBT and mental health, What's the Link article. We've got another podcast on Isn't the Christian Sexual Ethic Harmful and Repressive? And there's also some research that's been done about well-being of celibate gay Christians. You can find that all at livingout.org. We're having an amazing time on our training days, and the tour's continuing with Lancaster on Saturday the 19th of March from 9:30 till 1 in the afternoon. So come along to explore sexuality in our culture, the biblical picture, and how we can support same-sex attracted Christians in church. Book now at livingout.org. So we're talking about whether Christian teaching causes LGBT mental health problems. And in this section, we want to really talk about how we can support people to have better mental health, particularly those who are same-sex attracted. So how can Christians take a better approach to supporting people with mental health difficulties?
I mean, by talking about mental health difficulties. One of the things that you should be having as part of your, church family life together are sermons that are preaching into experiences around anxiety or depression or suicidal thoughts or OCD or whatever it might be. These need to be issues that are talked about openly in your church family. And, you can prepare your pastoral team for that by encouraging them to do a mental health first aid course. The staff team at my church have just done one of those and have found it fantastically helpful in making us more aware of the full range of mental health experiences, so much of the common grace that God's given us to help us in that, as well as thinking, actually, how does the Bible speak into those experiences and highlight those experiences in ways that are going to be helpful for the many in our churches for whom mental health experiences are live.
I agree that, openness is so key. And for churches, just starting the conversations of mental health to show people it's safe to do so, and where possible, sharing personal stories. I think a word to pastors where possible, if we have our own experiences, actually being open about those in responsible ways can be so helpful. So my local church context, we did just a 4-week preach series on mental health about a year and a half ago. And it really did something to help, start a conversation, to allow people to feel they are able to talk. I shared my own experience in that. And still to this day, a year and a half later, I get people specifically approaching me saying, I feel comfortable to talk to you about this because we started, I've heard the church talk about mental health, and saying, actually hearing about your own experience is so helpful to me. And there's just something about showing this is safe to talk about, showing this affects lots of us. Actually, often we put mental health as over there, a small box of people with very serious or specific diagnoses. Actually, talking about the fact that lots of us were struggling in lots of different ways at different phases in our life. And this is a really safe space to talk about that. Leading by example in that, opening the conversation makes such a difference to people.
I think that's absolutely key. I think modelling openness and vulnerability in leadership from the front. It's interesting because, I have bipolar disorder, and sometimes I find it a lot easier to say that I'm same-sex attracted than that I have bipolar disorder, because, there's certain stigma attached to it, or there are certain assumptions that people will make, or just there's that fear of just not being understood and people thinking, I might do something crazy at any moment. And so I think getting trained, getting resourced, learning from other organisations that can help as well. I mean, Mind are incredibly helpful. They've got brilliant fact sheets. As Christians, we don't, I think we have more of an obligation to get informed so that we can support people better. And like you say, there are so many different mental health things that affect everybody. So yeah, there's no excuses for not really understanding it.
We want to help people to see the wonder of an identity in being joined to Jesus. That is hugely encouraging. Sometimes the challenge in churches can be there's always a demand to do more. Often we hear sermons and it's always about being more committed, being more involved in church and so on. Whereas actually the gospel's got some gloriously wonderful things to say to us about just how loved we are in Jesus, the fact that he's stable and secure and doesn't go up and down depending on whether we're going up and down. I just think we need to preach into that more, to tell people you are absolutely secure. That's wonderful.
I think having a good theology of suffering and pain is really helpful as well, because I think sometimes you can feel guilty for not being joyful, and I don't think that's necessarily helpful. There is a deep joy in being a Christian. There's a hope and a peace that does pass all understanding and is certain and secure. But we all go through difficulties in life. We experience physical suffering and pain, and we experience mental suffering and pain. And it's not helpful when people have the attitude that, you just need to pray more or read your Bible more and you'll feel better. We know it's not as straightforward as that. And I think it's helpful when people are open and honest about the fact that Christians struggle with depression, OCD, bipolar, schizophrenia, all those sorts of things.
And that people don't sort of say, "Oh, you're anxious." That in and of itself is a sin.
Yes.
And just let's talk about rejoicing in the Lord always. Say it again, rejoice. Do not be anxious about anything, but everything. Those are the verses that are easily quoted, and obviously they have some relevance. But anxiety is something that just some people cannot help because of mental health experience they're having, and just as it were responding with a "don't do it" to someone who's anxious is as unhelpful as it is saying to somebody who's same-sex attracted, "Don't do it," as in, it just, if we're thinking that the only thing we should be saying is no, we fall into a hole. And I think, when it comes to people's experience of sexuality, all we sometimes say is "don't do it." When it comes to some people's experience of anxiety or depression, all we're heard to say is "don't do it." We need to be sane, and the Bible says so much more than that.
Yeah.
I found on that really key is helping people to understand emotions, a biblical view of emotions, and emotional health and mental health. There's big overlap. There are some differences, so I'm not saying it's all as simple as this, but actually helping people understand emotions as God-given signposts that reveal things in our thinking, our subconscious and such like, not just things that happen which, if they're wrong, you need to kind of reject and push away or just pray God will take away, but actually things God's given us to equip us to learn from, to then learn to respond well to, is really key. And my experience, and in my kind of church circles, is people do not get that. And so actually, I'm starting to feel stressed or anxious. This is a terrible thing. God, take this away. Actually, the healthy thing is to explore. So what's causing you to feel that? Oh, you're really scared you're going to lose your job, you're able to provide for your family. Oh, well, how does the truth of God and the truth of the gospel help you battle that fear? And actually, some emotion becomes a signpost to grow actually in maturity rather than a thing to reject and push away. So actually, I think learning to deal with emotions well feeds into positive mental health for many of us.
And specifically, how do you think we can provide good pastoral support for Christians who experience same-sex attraction and perhaps experience some mental difficulties alongside that?
I think there's various ways. I wrote a series of blogs actually on good pastoral support that appear on the website. Part of it is just good listening. Particularly actually for those who experience same-sex attraction. Many haven't been able to speak about it much, and it is just incredibly liberating to be able to talk. People's experiences of sexuality will vary, and so good pastoral support will involve good listening, just asking open questions. Tell me what that feels like. When are the times that are difficult? Where's the Lord helped you and encouraged you. So part of it is just being a really good listener, willing to spend time with people and ask good questions.
And I think we just need to be aware of the lies that are being told out there. So the lies that are being told to people like us who are seeking to live in the light of the Bible's teaching. We're being told that the churches that hold to that position are bad and negative places to be. Now, obviously, there have been churches, there are still churches which are bad, negative places for people like us to be. But if we just believe that lie entirely, and we are so often finding ourselves cut off from the people that can most help us. And, my experience is for a long time, I wasn't open and honest because I believed the lies from society around me and from liberal Christians that my evangelical church and friends and family would be nothing but negative. And so actually the thing that most harmed me was not the response of my evangelical church and friends and families who were beautifully, beautifully loving and caring when I first came out to them, but the lie I was told that they wouldn't be that. And one of the things that most saddens me are when things like suicide and weaponized in this whole era, or Christians like me are told that the response of my church and my family would be negative in a way that stops us talking to friends and family and churches, in a way that pushes us away from the people that are most wanting to and able to provide us with the help that we most need in the light of our convictions.
The weaponizing suicide thing, I think it's so important to highlight. One of the accusations often made against people like us and our organisation of the kind of views we take is that it leads to LGBT suicide, especially teen suicides. It's weaponizing suicide as kind of a tool against us. But I think that's such an unhelpful and irresponsible thing. It's really striking that the Samaritans, who are kind of, the experts in suicide prevention, makes important points, things just like the fact that suicide is not simple. It's often, where it is a complex phenomenon, often with multifaceted causes. So ever positing one particular trigger cause of a suicide is probably unrealistic, and it certainly is simplistic and unhelpful. And they also point out just the fact that actually telling someone they're at risk of suicide does increase their risk of suicide. Suicide is one of these things known as a social contagion. It's a contagious kind of idea. And there's good research that shows that's the case, especially among young people. So if a young person is told that in their particular life situation, whatever it might be, that puts them at increased risk of suicide, or if they're told that if they hear biblical teaching that says that same-sex sexual relationships aren't acceptable to God, they're going to be liable to commit suicide, research shows being told that actually increases the risk that they will feel suicidal or make an attempt on their own life. And so actually, the people trying to apparently protect young people by accusing people like us of causing teen suicides are really at risk of harming young people by planting that seed of an idea in young people's mind. So I just think basically we should take suicide out of the conversation. It's irresponsible, unhelpful, and we need to stop weaponizing it.
I think the best thing for me, and I think I've written something on this somewhere, I think probably on the Living Out website, is that, when I was a teenager, the most helpful things I was sort of told was actually, not to rush into a decision about my sexuality. And I think that, rather than sort of defining myself, at a really early age, was just to sort of allow things to develop and to get on and sort of see who I was in a number of areas of my life. And I found it really freeing as a teenager to just think about just getting on with life in a whole host of other areas before I made any sort of particular decision or definition of who I was as a sexual being.
You can read that in Ed's blog, Take Your Time.
Thank you for reminding me what it's called.
While we're talking about how we provide good pastoral support to help same-sex attracted people, I was just going to make the point of it's also important that we don't assume any mental health difficulty an LGBT person faces will be linked to their sexuality. That's often what people have done to me, and so actually in my own battles of depression and different things, people kind of basically almost say, oh, well, yes, of course, because your life is so difficult because you're a Christian and you're gay and you're same-sex attracted. And I'm thinking, my experience of depression has pretty much nothing to do with my sexuality, actually. There's a whole other load of issues. And it kind of, at very least, is annoying, if not actually more problematic, that people project onto me, of course you're going to have these issues because of your sexuality. So we want to be really sensitive to the ways people may be struggling because of sexuality impacted, but also not assume that's always the case.
Yeah, I've got a Christian friend who isn't able to access mental health provision through the NHS here in the UK because every time he tries to access, he's told it's basically all because of his sexuality. And if only he was, if only he was sexually active, all his mental health problems would disappear. And that has been just incredibly damaging for him because he hasn't been able to get the help that he needs from the body that's set up to help him, because they keep on saying, go and get yourself a boyfriend, everything will be okay. It's tragic.
And it is tragic because to base your identity on your sexuality is inherently flawed. I mean, one of the friends said to me recently, actually, they said, Andy, you're in a much more secure position because my emotions go up and down depending on whether I'm in a relationship or not. You're at least in the position where you know you're not likely to have one. You're actually much more stable. And it's funny, as I look back, the thing that has helped my mental health to be stable is actually all to do with the church. The two things that have enabled me to go through life relatively happily most of the time, in the end, to be honest, aren't coastal walks in the West Wing. They are actually being shown Jesus from the Bible and having friends within the church. Those are the two things that have contributed most to my happiness in life, is those times when you're just shown Jesus and he's beautiful and you get to have honest, open conversations with friends who know me and love me. Those are the two things that have helped me most, and they come within the church context, a church that is holding to a conservative view on sexuality.
So it seems like the best way to provide good support for Christians who experience same-sex attraction is not to make assumptions or false claims, to listen well and to provide good, safe spaces for people to talk about their experiences, to teach biblically faithfully, but also do that in a context of a supportive church culture where we're actually seeking to together live out the story of sexuality for everybody. There is a resource on our website called the Church Audit, which you can use. It's got 10 questions that you can go through just to see if your church is that kind of place. We have training days on that as well. So if you're interested in hearing us and seeing us in person talk about that, then do look at the events page of our website. I thought we'd just end this episode on a positive note. A quick fire round here. Andrew's looking really worried. You can't win anything, don't worry. What are your top tips for staying mentally healthy?
My worry was more whether we can actually be quick fire. I'll try. Mine would be walking and talking. I mean, it's funny, several have said walking is one of my ways, but actually it just is the case that physical activity and getting out into the natural world helps. Getting out into the natural world, when you realize how big the world is, your problems become smaller. And that's a recognized psychological thing. And so some really practical things, walking makes a big thing. But then talking to other people just is so important when it comes to mental health. Getting things that are trapped inside of us and affecting us out just by the process of sharing, can make a big difference. Talking where necessary to medical professionals as well. It's important to say that there should be no shame among Christians about seeking help from medical professionals for mental health problems. So sometimes that talking needs to take place. But also talking to God. This is the wonderful, comforting thing of however we're feeling, whatever's going on, we can talk to him. And the Psalms prove that. Anything you're feeling, God already knows it. Why not tell him? And actually it will do you good to tell him. So talking it out, including to God, and even primarily to God, is a hugely important thing.
Ed?
Well, yeah, just finding people that have felt the same things or felt the same way. And again, the Psalms, one of the great places to turn to is that, I always say in a church context that there is a psalm written for every situation and for every single personality type. And when it comes to mental health, there's a psalm written by somebody who's going through your emotions and who had your similar personality, and find it and live in it and dwell in it and take it slowly. And remember, none of the Psalms were written in 5 minutes. They were sometimes written over, months, decades, a lifetime. But find somebody that's experienced what you're experiencing. And the Psalms would be a great place to turn, as would, poetry more generally, as would a lot of literature, the way you can actually just find out that there's somebody else that's been through this. You're not alone. And there's other people that can sometimes put into words what you're feeling in the way that you struggle to. I can think of friends who've been going through really hard times and they haven't been able to express in conversation, as Andrew's just encouraged them, what they're experiencing, but they have been able to say, read the psalm, or this poem puts it really well, or just hand over a book under which they've underlined the paragraph that really encapsulates what they're thinking and feeling.
Do whatever works for you. So if it's music, do music. If it's walks, do walks. Do whatever works for you, because God gives us stuff to enjoy. And one last quick thing. The world depends on God, not on you. And so you can go to sleep occasionally.
Excellent. I think for me, I'm realising how much I need fun in my life. I think I have a tendency to take life too seriously, and sometimes life is very serious, but I definitely need to just laugh. It releases good chemicals, and it's, God wants us to enjoy ourselves as well. And also friends, people that are really close to me and that I can talk to about things. I think I have been very individualistic in my life, and I think I'm realising more and more how much the Christian life is a team sport. So having friends around. Well, that's all we've got time for today. I want to say thank you to Ed, Andrew and Andy, and thank you to you for listening. We're going to be back in a couple of weeks to tackle the next question, which is, why am I gay? In the meantime, don't forget to like and subscribe. Leave us a review or rating if you can do. It helps other people find us and benefit from these conversations. That's all for now. Bye.